At a family dinner, my stepmother said, "Families share money." That same night, my bank flagged unauthorized access to my account. I decided I was finished being polite. I looked straight at my father across the kitchen table and said what I had held back for years. If I hear one more comment from your wife about my money, there will be no more friendly conversations. I will personally explain where she stands and why my money is not hers. The room went quiet. The fridge hummed in the background. My stepmother's coffee cup stopped midway to her lips. My father looked at me as if he didn't recognize his own daughter. That was the moment everything shifted. I grew up thinking families fall apart through shouting, slammed doors, and arguments loud enough for neighbors to hear. I didn't know they could fall apart slowly, through polite smiles and subtle remarks. One gentle comment placed carefully under the table can cut just as deeply. My mother died when I was 14. Cancer moves quickly and without mercy. In early summer, she mentioned a dull ache in her side. By late fall, I stood at her grave in borrowed black shoes that hurt my heels, while people told me how strong I was. I hated that word. Strong meant you weren't allowed to break down. Less than a year later, my father introduced us to Margaret Hale. She was not openly unkind. That was the issue. She smiled constantly, spoke softly, and touched my arm as if we were already close. She brought casseroles to neighbors and poured wine at dinners. People liked her. They said my father was lucky to find happiness again. I was 18 by then, old enough to notice, but young enough to stay silent. 3 years later, when I left for basic training, my father hugged me tightly and said he was proud. Margaret Hale cried just enough to appear supportive without ruining her makeup. "We'll handle everything here," she said. "You just focus on your future." I chose to believe her. Maybe I needed to. The military taught me discipline, patience, and control. It trained me to observe more than I spoke, to read a room, and to wait before reacting. Those lessons helped me later, even when I didn't realize it. The first comment about my money came during my 3rd year of service. We were on a video call. Margaret Hale sat close to my father, her hand resting lightly on his knee, as if marking her place. "You must be doing well now," she said with a smile, "with your pay, housing allowance, and bonuses." "I manage," I replied lightly. "Well," she continued, "it's comforting to know the family has security." I noticed the way she said family. The remarks continued, always polite, always framed as concern. "Have you thought about long-term planning? Wouldn't it help if your father assisted you with managing things? You're still young. Money can be complicated." My father would nod slightly and avoid my eyes. When I came home on leave, I saw changes. My mother's wooden desk had been replaced by a glass table that Margaret said made the room feel cleaner. My mom's old file cabinet, full of insurance papers and birthday cards, was gone. When I asked, Margaret waved her hand. "We organized the old things. No need to worry." That was when I began to worry. One evening after dinner, she brought out dessert and said casually, "We should talk about consolidating accounts. It just makes sense for families." I set down my fork. "My accounts are fine." She smiled calmly. "Of course, just a suggestion." That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the faint outline where my mother's calendar once hung. I felt like a visitor in a place that used to be mine. The breaking point did not arrive through shouting. It came through paperwork. While on duty, I received a bank email, a standard security alert about an attempted login with incorrect verification. I froze. No one but me had access to my information. When I called the bank, they asked if I had recently allowed anyone to help manage my finances. I had not. They mentioned an inquiry connected to my father's address. Something inside me became firm. 10 days later, I went home on leave. I did not accuse anyone. I did not raise my voice. I observed. Margaret spoke often about expenses, investments, and how costly it was to maintain the house. She mentioned how much my father deserved to relax after everything he had endured. Then she said it clearly. "Well, your money is already part of this household." I looked at my father. He didn't correct her. That's when I stood, walked to the table, and said calmly, without anger, "If I hear another word from your wife about my money, there will be no more polite discussions. I will explain exactly where she stands and why my money is not hers. Do you understand?" Margaret's smile disappeared. My father's face turned pale. He nodded slightly. But understanding is not the same as respect. And I was done requesting respect. I didn't expect immediate change. People like Margaret do not retreat when confronted. They adjust. They smile tighter. They wait. For a few weeks, everything was quiet, too quiet. She stopped mentioning money directly. Instead, she told long stories about stress, responsibility, and how hard it was to keep things together while I was away. She never asked for anything outright. She allowed implication to linger. Meanwhile, my father seemed smaller. I noticed how he looked at her before answering simple questions, how he changed direction mid-sentence if she shifted in her chair. Once you see that pattern, you cannot ignore it. The military taught me something important. Control does not always require force. Often, it is built through conditioning. Margaret tested the boundary again at a family gathering, one of those long dinners with distant relatives, too much food, and polite tension. She laughed softly and told my aunt, "With her military income, we're very fortunate. Not many families have that stability." My fork paused. I didn't look at her. I looked at my father. He smiled. "She's doing well," he said. That was the fracture. Later, I spoke to him privately in the hallway outside my old bedroom. I explained that I had set a boundary and that it had been crossed. "She was just talking," he said, rubbing his forehead. "You're reading too much into it." "I'm reading exactly what's there," I replied, "and I'm asking you once to handle it." He sighed. "You don't understand how complicated things are." That sentence clarified everything. Complicated often means excuses have already been accepted. A few days later, another bank alert arrived. This time, it wasn't an access attempt. It was an inquiry about adding an authorized user and updating beneficiary information. I didn't confront anyone. I documented everything: dates, emails, screenshots, statements. Emotions fade, records remain. Margaret grew more confident, interpreting my silence as surrender. She framed comments as jokes. "Be careful," she would say with a laugh, "or she'll cut us off." Others laughed. I did not. One evening, she placed a stack of papers on the counter for my father. "Just estimates," she said pleasantly. "We can review options together." I recognized the bank logo on the first page. That night, I lay awake listening to the house, the pipes, the air conditioner, the quiet rhythm of a place that no longer felt secure. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Before sunrise, I went for a run. Cold air filled my lungs and steadied my thoughts. With each step, I replayed what I had ignored because it was easier than facing it. Margaret did not want assistance. She wanted influence, and my father allowed it. When I returned, she was already at the counter with coffee. She smiled. "Sleep well?" "Fine," I said. "You've been quiet." "I've been listening." Her smile tightened briefly. That afternoon, I made a call, not to my father or to Margaret, but to legal aid. I presented facts without names. The officer on the line listened carefully before asking, "Did you authorize any of this?" "No." "Then you're right to be concerned." Concerned. Not dramatic. Not paranoid. Validated. By the end of the call, I knew. For years, I told myself he was simply tired, grieving, or trying to keep the peace. I eventually understood that peace came at a cost, and I was expected to cover it. Later that night, my father knocked on my door. He stood there awkwardly, hands in his pockets, eyes worn. "Your stepmother says you've been distant," he said. I didn't invite him inside. "I found the folder," I replied. He stiffened. "You went through our things?" "I saw my name," I said calmly. "On plans I never agreed to." He inhaled slowly. "She was just thinking ahead." "For who?" I asked. "She's concerned about the house?" "About us." "What about me?" He looked away. That was my answer. After he left, I sat on the edge of my bed and allowed myself to process it. Not anger, not sadness, just the steady realization that my father was not being pressured. He was involved. The next morning, I contacted the fraud department again. This time, I spoke directly. I described the letters, the inquiries, the documents, the handwritten notes, and the shared address. The agent's tone shifted immediately. "Do not confront them," she said. "Keep documenting. We're opening a file." A file. The word sounded simple, but it carried weight. When I returned to base, I built a system. I scanned every document. I photographed handwritten pages. I saved emails and logged conversations with exact dates, times, and wording. Copies were stored in 2 secure locations. I researched the laws relevant to my accounts and my state. The military trained me to prepare for contingencies, so I did. Margaret noticed the shift before my father did. "You've been very busy," she said lightly during a phone call. "You barely share anything anymore." "I'm focused," I answered. That's good, she replied. We all have to do our part. I nearly smiled at that. Instead, I ended the call and recorded her words. The final confirmation arrived unexpectedly. A loan officer mistakenly forwarded me an email meant for my father. It included a draft application with projected future income listed as collateral. Mine. That was the moment I understood this was not confusion. It was a calculated plan. Plans can be dismantled. That night in the barracks, I lay awake listening to the steady breathing around me and the low hum of fluorescent lights. I thought about my mother, how organized she had been, how she labeled everything, how she said preparation was an act of care. I finally understood. By morning, doubt had turned into resolve. They had mistaken my silence for agreement. They assumed distance meant ignorance. They were wrong. I didn't change my behavior immediately. That would have exposed the shift too soon. People who believe they hold control react when they sense resistance. But they relax if they think everything is normal. So I remained courteous. I answered Margaret's calls. I responded to my father's messages. I smiled during video chats and discussed work in general terms. I asked about the house and their health, enough to appear engaged. Privately, I was building structure. Each morning before work, I reviewed my records, dates, statements, language patterns, and moments when Margaret framed influence as concern. I treated it like intelligence gathering. Verify, confirm, document. Emotion was irrelevant. Structure was effective. I opened a new account at a bank my family had never used. I redirected my deposits. I activated alerts on every account. I froze my credit. When confirmation emails arrived, I saved them in a folder labeled Evidence. I contacted legal assistance again, this time with names, screenshots, and documentation. The officer listened without interruption. "This isn't a misunderstanding," he said evenly. "This is attempted financial exploitation." Hearing it stated plainly removed the final doubt. This wasn't a family disagreement. It was misconduct. "What are my options?" I asked. He explained clearly. Civil remedies, protective steps, and if required, criminal escalation. He emphasized one point. You decide how far this goes. That night, I called the fraud unit handling my case. I asked detailed questions about procedures, timelines, and documentation standards. While I was on the phone, Margaret texted, "Just checking in. Your father's been stressed. We're all worried about you." I saved it. The next step required patience. I needed them to believe their approach was working. I casually mentioned during a call that handling everything alone felt exhausting. I said I was overwhelmed. Margaret immediately leaned in. "You don't have to do this by yourself," she said gently. "Families share responsibilities." "I understand," I replied. "I'm just not sure where to begin." Her tone softened further. "Your father can help. We both can." In that moment, I knew she believed she had regained control. Over the following weeks, she advanced carefully. Suggestions about forms, comments about simplifying things, reminders that centralizing finances would make life easier. Each proposal was framed as support. The documents told a different story. Every attempt was logged. My father avoided eye contact whenever the topic surfaced. He never interrupted her. His silence became part of the record. I began preparing for the conversation I knew was coming, not emotionally, but strategically. I decided what I would say, what I would not say, and where silence would serve better than argument. I chose the setting deliberately. A family dinner in a neutral environment with enough witnesses to matter, but not enough to create spectacle. I wanted clarity, not drama. Margaret looked composed that evening. She always appeared confident when she believed she was in control. She spoke about stability and how proud she was of our girl. Midway through dessert, she introduced it. "We've been thinking," she said, glancing at my father. "Maybe it's time to formalize a few things." I placed my spoon down. "What things?" "Just precautions," she replied smoothly, "in case something happens." "To whom?" I asked. She hesitated briefly. "To any of us." I nodded. "I've already secured my accounts." Her smile flickered. "Oh? Yes," I said calmly, "and I've consulted my bank and legal counsel." The table fell silent. My father's face drained of color. Margaret's expression sharpened. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her tone controlled. "Because someone attempted to access my finances without my consent," I answered evenly. She gave a short laugh. "That sounds dramatic." "It's documented," I replied. Silence followed. "I set a boundary," I continued, turning to my father. "It was crossed." He swallowed. "We were trying to help. You were making decisions for me, I said. That's not the same thing. Margaret leaned back. You're overreacting. No, I said. I'm prepared. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse further. I simply made it clear that the quiet version of me no longer existed. After dinner, she approached me in the kitchen. You're making this ugly, she said sharply. It already was, I replied. I just stopped ignoring it. She studied me carefully. You think you have power here? I know I do. For the first time, her composure shifted. She understood something my father had not. I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was acting methodically. And methodical people follow through. The dinner itself had been her idea. She framed it as reconciliation, which should have been my first signal. People rarely seek peace unless they want to regain position. She suggested inviting extended relatives, an aunt, a cousin who asked invasive questions, and family friends who still saw me as the quiet child I once was. It'll be good for everyone, she said. We're all under stress. She often used stress when she meant leverage. I agreed immediately. The pause before her reply told me she hadn't expected that. Good, she said. I'll make your favorite. She never remembered what that was. The evening arrived cool and crisp. The house smelled of roasted vegetables and cinnamon. The table was arranged carefully. Candles aligned, fine china placed with precision. Margaret wore a cream sweater, projecting warmth. My father lingered by the sink, drying the same glass repeatedly. Guests arrived with coats, greetings, and compliments. Someone mentioned pride in my service. Margaret responded quickly. She's doing very well, she said brightly. We're fortunate. Not every family has this kind of security. What is that? She asked. A summary, I replied. I've recently reviewed some financial activity. My father straightened. Margaret Hale gave a light laugh. Is this really the right time? I believe it is, I said. I didn't open the envelope or pass anything across the table. I let it remain sealed between us, its presence heavier than its contents. My bank contacted me, I continued evenly. There have been repeated attempts to access my accounts, information requests, and draft applications. None were authorized. The room grew still. My aunt looked uncertain. Someone cleared their throat. That sounds like an error, Margaret said quickly. Banks make mistakes. Not like this, I answered. Not repeatedly. My father finally spoke. We can talk about this later. I'm comfortable addressing it now, I said. It has already been referenced publicly. Margaret's jaw tightened. I've opened a file with the fraud department, I continued, and I've consulted legal counsel. The shift was immediate. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her glass. Her smile remained, but it was strained. This is unnecessary, she said. We're family. That's exactly why it matters, I replied. Silence followed. Candlelight flickered. I turned to my father. I warned you. I set a boundary. It was crossed. He looked it down at his plate. I'm not accusing anyone tonight, I said calmly. I'm informing you that a professional meeting is scheduled. We'll determine next steps there. Margaret leaned back, composure thinning just enough to reveal calculation. You're threatening us. No, I said. I'm providing clarity. The rest of dinner moved forward awkwardly. Conversations resumed, forced and uneven. Guests avoided my eyes. When they began leaving, Margaret hugged them warmly, smiling as if nothing had happened. To an outsider, it would have appeared successful. Once the last car drove away, she turned to me. You humiliated me. I stated facts, I answered. You did this intentionally. Yes. My father stood between us, shoulders lowered. Can we calm down? I am calm, I said. Margaret laughed sharply. You think you've won something? I think you understand now, I replied. That's enough for tonight. She glanced at the unopened envelope still on the table. What's inside? You'll see at the meeting. For the first time since I'd known her, uncertainty crossed her face. That night, I slept well for the first time in months. Once leverage is exposed, it loses its power. She knew that. The meeting was set for 10:30 a.m. on a Wednesday. Not at the house, not in a cafe, neutral ground. An office with glass walls and neutral artwork, a space designed to keep emotion separate from process. I chose it deliberately. Emotion blurs lines. Documentation defines them. My father arrived first. He looked older than the week before, shoulders hunched, tie pulled tight, as if to maintain some sense of control. He nodded stiffly when I entered. Margaret arrived 5 minutes late, wearing a dark blazer and heels that echoed sharply against the floor. She smiled at the receptionist, at the framed certificates, at everyone except me. We sat. The mediator introduced herself, followed by the attorney I had retained. Quiet, precise, and deliberate. Margaret watched her hands instead of her face. That told me enough. "Let's begin," the mediator said. Margaret spoke first. "This is dramatic. We're here because of a misunderstanding." My attorney slid a folder across the table. "It's documented." Margaret's smile tightened. "Let's review the facts," the mediator suggested. So we did. Timeline, dates, attempted access, unauthorized inquiries, draft applications, the handwritten note, the collateral listing projected future income, mine. Each item was presented calmly. No raised voices, no accusations, just documentation. My father stared ahead, jaw clenched. Margaret shifted repeatedly in her chair. "This doesn't prove intent," she said. "Families plan for other people's money?" my attorney asked. Silence. The mediator turned to me. "What outcome are you seeking?" I inhaled steadily. I had prepared for this. "First," I said, "a formal acknowledgement that my finances are mine alone. No shared access, no inquiries, no planning without written consent." Margaret began to respond, then stopped. "Second, a signed statement confirming that previous attempts to access or reference my accounts were unauthorized." My father flinched. "Third, a commitment that my name, income, and projected earnings will not be used in any financial discussions, applications, or representations going forward." Margaret leaned forward. "And if we don't agree?" I met her gaze. "Then the fraud file proceeds." The room fell quiet. "You'd do that to us?" my father asked. "I already acted to protect myself," I replied. He covered his face briefly. "We were trying to simplify things." "For whom?" I asked. He had no answer. The mediator intervened gently. "There are alternatives to escalation, settlements, boundaries." "That's what I'm offering," I said. Margaret gave a short laugh. "You're enjoying this." "No," I replied. "I'm ending it." She turned to my father. "You're going to let her do this?" He hesitated. That hesitation said everything. My attorney placed another document on the table. "These are the terms. If signed, no further action will follow." Margaret scanned it quickly. "This restricts us." "It protects me," I said. "And what about family?" "Family doesn't require access to my accounts." She looked at my father again. "Say something." He swallowed. "Margaret, maybe we should sign." Her head turned sharply. "After everything I've done?" The mediator raised a hand. "Let's stay productive." Margaret leaned back, composure cracking. "You're choosing her." My father stared at the table. "I'm choosing to stop this from getting worse." She laughed bitterly. "You always retreat," I observed quietly. I wasn't asking anyone to take sides. I was drawing a line. The mediator slid the pen forward. Margaret didn't reach for it. My father did. "Wait," she said. "If we sign, what happens?" "The matter ends here," my attorney replied, "provided there are no further violations." "And if we don't?" "The documentation is forwarded," I answered. She looked at me directly for the first time without calculation. "You think you're disciplined? So controlled?" "I am," I said. "That's why this works." My father signed first. The sound of the pen on paper was louder than expected. Margaret hesitated, then signed with a sharp stroke. The mediator gathered the documents. "We'll finalize this." As we stood, my father lingered. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. "Not today," I said. Margaret walked past without speaking, her heels echoing down the hallway. Outside, the air was cool and clear. I inhaled deeply. It wasn't relief. It was completion. I hadn't won. I had concluded. The silence afterward was unfamiliar. Not tense, not fragile. Clean, like a room cleared of furniture that was never yours. 3 days later, I drove back to base. The highway stretched through early fog. I kept the radio off. I wanted to hear my own thoughts without defense or rehearsal. They were quieter. My father sent a brief message that week. "I hope you're fine." I didn't respond. Not out of anger. Anger requires energy. The message lacked accountability. Hope without ownership is avoidance. I had spent years filling gaps for him. I stopped. Margaret didn't reach out at all. I later heard she told others I had changed, that the military made me cold, that I turned money into something unpleasant. I didn't correct her. People like her need narratives. I didn't. What surprised me most was how little I missed the house. I expected nostalgia. Instead, I realized the home I remembered ended when my mother died. Everything afterward had been edited. On my next free weekend, I visited the cemetery. The grounds were quiet, the headstones steady in the afternoon light. I brought nothing. I didn't need to. Standing there, I said quietly, "I handled it. I didn't let them take what wasn't theirs." I thought about the girl I had been, trying to keep everything intact, shrinking to create space for others. That wasn't weakness. It was youth and misplaced loyalty. I learned to say no, I said softly, and to mean it. The wind moved gently through the trees. For the first time in years, I felt no need to wait for permission to breathe. Life found a new rhythm. My finances remained exactly where they belonged. My name stayed off anything that wasn't mine. The fraud file was closed, resolved. The folder labeled evidence went into storage, not as a threat, as a reminder. 5 months later, my father left a voicemail. His voice sounded older. I should have protected you, he said. I didn't. I'm sorry. I listened 3 times, then archived it. Apologies acknowledge damage. They don't restore trust automatically. I wasn't obligated to resume a relationship because awareness arrived late. The military gave me structure. My mother gave me values. This experience, unwanted but necessary, gave me something else. Boundaries, not walls, not punishment, just clear lines drawn with intention. There was no victory lap, no dramatic triumph. What I gained was quieter, ownership of my life, the understanding that respect does not require permission, and the knowledge that family is not defined by access but by care.